Vera Sinclair here, reporting live from Southern Boulevard in Loxahatchee, Florida, where behind me the ground is moving on what may be the most consequential artificial intelligence infrastructure project in South Florida's history. This is Project Tango, a proposed hyperscale AI data center campus spanning nearly 200 acres of western Palm Beach County. At full build-out, over 3.6 million square feet of digital infrastructure, one of the largest AI computing facilities ever proposed in the southeastern United States. Now, here's what you need to understand about this story. Project Tango didn't start this way. Back in 2016, this site was quietly approved as a standard data center, 206,000 square feet. Routine. Unremarkable. It sat on the consent agenda at a December County Commission meeting, the kind of item that gets approved without discussion. And for years, nobody noticed. Then the AI boom happened, and almost overnight, this site transformed. Developers PBA Holdings, a local rock mining company, alongside Tennessee-based Phillips Inc. and Atlanta-based TPA Group, returned to the county with a request. They wanted to expand, not modestly. They wanted to add 64 acres and scale the project to 1.8 million square feet. Then nearly 4 million. The end user, the tech giant who will actually operate this facility, has never been officially identified. Amazon, Microsoft, Google, those are the names residents whisper. But under Florida law, that identity can be shielded for up to 12 months through economic development channels. The community found out the way communities usually find out about things like this. Too late and all at once. By December 2025, more than 50 residents packed a county commission hearing. They came with fears about noise, water consumption, air quality, and proximity to Saddle View Elementary School just down the road. By December 2025, more than 50 residents packed a county commission hearing. They came with fears about noise, water consumption, air quality, and proximity to Saddle View Elementary School just down the road. The commission voted 7-0 to pause the application and order more impact studies. As of tonight, the final vote has been postponed to July 15, 2026. This is not just a zoning dispute. This is a case study in what happens when artificial intelligence infrastructure moves faster than the governance frameworks designed to contain it. I'm Vera Sinclair, and this story is far from over. We're back with our in-depth look at Project Tango, the hyperscale data center in Loxahatchee, Florida. When we talk about the ethics of Project Tango, we are not talking about whether artificial intelligence is good or bad. We are talking about something far more precise and far more uncomfortable. We are looking at who holds power, who withholds information, and who pays the price. Let's start with power and jurisdiction. Project Tango exists inside a three-way collision of authority. At the federal level, President Trump signed an executive order in late 2025 seeking to limit state-level AI regulation, arguing that fragmented rules across 50 states would undermine America's ability to compete with China on artificial intelligence. Governor Ron DeSantis disagreed. He proposed a statewide Citizen AI Bill of Rights and supported Senate Bill 482, which would require hyperscale data centers to be sited at least 5 miles from residential neighborhoods and schools. And at the local level, Palm Beach County commissioners, elected by the people most directly affected, are being asked to make a decision that the state and federal governments can't agree on. 3 layers of authority, 0 consensus, and a July deadline. Now, transparency and accountability. This is where the story gets uncomfortable. The end user of Project Tango has still not been officially identified. The project scaled from 206,000 square feet to nearly 4 million, and the expansion appeared on a consent agenda. That's the part of a county meeting reserved for non-controversial routine items. Residents weren't notified. Community input wasn't solicited. The county followed its procedures. Technically, nothing illegal happened. And that is precisely the problem. A hyperscale AI data center is not a routine item. It is a different category of infrastructure entirely. As County Commissioner Maria Sachs put it, the difference between what was approved in 2016 and what is being built now is the difference between building a stall for 3 horses and building a racetrack. The community had a right to know. They didn't. Individual rights versus collective benefit. More than 8,000 residents have signed a petition opposing this project. They cite noise from cooling systems running around the clock. They cite water consumption. They cite air quality. They cite the horses. Wellington is the winter equestrian capital of the world, and horses are acutely sensitive to noise and vibration. On the other side, jobs, tax revenue, digital infrastructure that powers hospitals, banks, emergency services, and the economy. The developers argue the site is already industrial, adjacent to a Florida power and light plant, and that comparisons to residential neighborhoods are misleading. Both arguments are real. Neither is wrong. But only one side had a seat at the table when this project began. Economic interest versus community harm. Florida Power and Light has committed that existing ratepayers will not see higher bills. The developers will fund all new electrical infrastructure. That is a meaningful assurance. But the broader question, who benefits and who bears the cost, remains unresolved. The jobs created by a hyperscale data center are largely technical, largely remote, and largely not local. The noise, the traffic during construction, the environmental footprint, those are local, permanent, and concentrated in communities that never had a vote. And finally, the ethical defense. I have covered governance failures on 4 continents. I have reported on corporate opacity from Wall Street to Brussels. And I will tell you this plainly. The governance failure in Project Tango is not corruption. It is architecture. The systems in place were not designed for the speed and scale of AI infrastructure. And when systems fail to adapt, communities bear the cost. That is not acceptable, and it is not inevitable. I'm Vera Sinclair. We'll be right back. Vera Sinclair here, back in the studio. Let's talk about the rule book, because when we ask whether Project Tango was governed well, we have to measure it against the frameworks that actually apply here. And in the United States, in the state of Florida, in Palm Beach County, that means 2 frameworks and 1 proposed law that may arrive too late to matter. First, the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. The National Institute of Standards and Technology released its AI RMF in 2023. The problem? It's all voluntary. That is the first governance gap, and it is a significant one, because voluntary means optional, and optional means that a developer, a county commission, and a utility company can proceed with a $2 billion hyperscale AI infrastructure project without ever formally assessing its risk, documenting its governance structure, or communicating its decision-making process to the people most affected. That is exactly what happened here. While the NIST AI RMF establishes 4 core functions: govern, map, measure, and manage, that don't apply if they are just suggestions. Still, there are solid guidelines here. Under govern, we establish organizational accountability. Under map, we identify who is affected and how. Under measure, we assess the impact. Under manage, we implement controls and communicate decisions openly. Project Tango failed on all 4 counts. No published governance structure. Affected communities were not mapped until they showed up at a commission meeting in force. Environmental and acoustic impact was not measured until public outcry forced additional studies. And the decision-making process was not communicated until it was already well underway. The corrective workflow is not complicated. It is just late. Then there's ISO 42001. The International Organization for Standardization released ISO 42001 in 2023, the world's first international standard for AI management systems. It requires organizations deploying or enabling AI to establish documented policies, conduct impact assessments, and engage stakeholders throughout the process. Let me be precise about that last point. Stakeholder engagement under ISO 42001 is not a courtesy. It is not a public hearing held after the zoning board has already recommended approval. It is a structured, documented process that begins at the planning stage, before the equipment is ordered, before the permits are filed, before the consent agenda item is drafted. Project Tango did none of that. Next is Florida Senate Bill 482. Then there is the proposed legislation. Governor DeSantis's Citizen AI Bill of Rights gave rise to Senate Bill 482, filed by Senator Tom Leek. It would require hyperscale data centers to be sited at least 5 miles from residential neighborhoods and schools. It would mandate impact studies before approval. It would give communities a formal seat at the table. It is not passed. House Republicans are deferring to the Trump administration's deregulatory position on AI. As of this report, it is unlikely to clear the legislature this session, which means that on July 15th, when Palm Beach County commissioners vote on Project Tango, they will do so without a binding state framework, without a binding federal framework, and against the backdrop of a voluntary national standard that was never applied. So where does that leave us? The gap analysis is clear. Project Tango was planned, approved in its original form, and resubmitted for a 4 million square foot expansion without a published AI impact assessment, without stakeholder consultation, without end-user transparency, and without governance documentation aligned to any recognized standard. The corrective workflow, the path to accountability, requires 5 steps. First, publish the end-user identity and the contractual terms with FPL. Second, release a full, independent environmental and acoustic impact study. Third, establish a formal community advisory panel with binding input rights before the July vote. Fourth, align all project governance documentation to NIST AI RMF and ISO 42001. Fifth, submit that documentation for independent third-party review. That is not an unreasonable ask. That is the minimum standard for a project of this size, this consequence, and this permanence. The question is not whether these frameworks exist. They do. The question is whether the institutions responsible for oversight have the will to require them. I'm Vera Sinclair. Stay with us. In this final segment, it's your turn. I've spent months on this story. I've stood outside that commission meeting in December and watched 50 residents line up at the microphone. I've read the petition with 8,000 names. I've reviewed the zoning filings, the FPL agreements, the legislative record in Tallahassee. I've tracked the federal executive order, the governor's response, the competing bills that may or may not pass before the July vote. And I'll be honest with you, this story isn't resolved. It's unfolding right now in real time in your backyard. which is exactly why I'm talking to you. Because what I just walked you through, the governance failures, the transparency gaps, the jurisdictional conflict, the ethical fault lines, that is not just journalism. That is the content of your assessment. You have a rubric in front of you, 10 dimensions, 2 parts, 100 points. Part 1 asks whether you can identify the frameworks, map the failures, build a corrective workflow, and defend a governance position. That is the technical work. It requires precision. It requires you to cite provisions, not summarize them. It requires you to take a position and hold it under pressure. Part 2 asks something harder. It asks whether you understand why this matters, who holds authority and why it's contested, who was left out and what that cost, where individual rights end and collective benefit begins, how economic interest shapes the story we're told about community harm, and whether the person presenting this material actually believes something or is just describing the terrain. I believe something. I've told you what it is. Now it's your turn. When you score this presentation, I want you to ask yourself one question. Did this person do the work, or did they describe the work? Did they take a position, or did they document positions? Did they defend a governance strategy, or did they list governance strategies? There is a difference. You know what it is. Score accordingly. I'm Vera Sinclair. This has been a Vera Sinclair investigative report for ISM 430, AI Governance and Ethics. Stay sharp, stay curious, and hold the line.